A very good evening and welcome to Capital Connection, where we join the dots to give you the big picture of business in Africa. I'm Arnold Segawa. On the agenda, the world's fashion industry is worth trillions of dollars annually. Africa's slice is a little more than 31 billion US dollars. Our panel will discuss how Africa can grow the slice of the world's fashion industry pie to become a leading global player, and with it, generate wealth and jobs from the seamstress to the catwalk. But first, a public spat between Angola's former president, Eduardo dos Santos, and his successor, João Lourenco, is turning ugly. Since independence from Portugal in 1975, Angola has been ruled by the MPLA party. The oil-rich country has weathered invasions by South Africa's apartheid military force and a long-running civil war that finally ended with the 2002 killing of the UNITA rebel leader Jonas Savimbi. Joining us via Skype from London is Matthew KINDINGER, a senior analyst with the Frontier Strategy Group. Welcome, Matthew. And many thanks for making time to speak to us. Just give us a sense of what the cause could be for this unusual and high-profile public row between the MPLA.
Well, thank you for having me today. Well, I would say that the causes of this spat are threefold. Firstly, Mr. Lourenco has now taken power of the MPLA. He's now become the chairman of the MPLA, and in addition to being president, he now holds a lot more power in the government. He also may be trying to distract from the fact that the economy has been in recession since he came to power. So he's trying to deflect a little bit away from the country's economic problems. But also he's now under pressure from the IMF to show that he is tackling the country's economic problems and governance standards more directly.
Right. It's very interesting you do bring in the IMF because, of course, they will ask for lots of structural reforms with the new president in order to give them a reform package, a structural reform package there. But going forward, I remember listening to the time when Eduardo dos Santos actually was out. And people were saying he's chosen someone who he trusts, someone who is in his inner circle. And a few months later, we're seeing a turn of events of sorts. What does this make of the entire picture?
Well, it is very interesting. A lot of analysts were quite surprised at how quickly Mr. Lourenco started to tackle vested interests within the government and within the country in general. But I would say generally it means that Mr. Lourenco is more of a reformer than many people anticipated.
Right, let's talk about some of the reforms that you think are likely to take shape since it took power in 2017. What has actually stood out for you?
So I'd say the most important or most significant reforms that have taken place has been the partial liberalization of the foreign currency regime. So now the Kwanza has a managed depreciation that is taking place. This has meant that access to foreign currency is much, much easier than it was. The president has also liberalized a number of sectors, which has meant that there are now more sectors that investors can participate in. But overall, unfortunately, the impact of these reforms hasn't been incredibly significant on overall levels of economic growth.
Right. I'm actually, you lost me there on the FX regime. That's very interesting because the IMF and the Bretton Woods institution are very, very keen on having liberalized FX regimes, more free float, as opposed to pegging them to maybe a US dollar of sorts. And going forward, how much headwinds is he about to face, given the fact that inflation is not coming down?
Well, yes. So FX liberalization is incredibly important for the economy. Unfortunately, inflation is likely to remain elevated going forwards. And this is because here at Frontier Strategy Group, we are forecasting a continued depreciation of the Kwanza. There is still a lot of pressure on access to foreign currency. And so there are going to be significant economic challenges and monetary challenges for the government and the president going forwards.
Right, let's talk about one person who has been in the thick of the, in the news for the past few months. That's, of course, the daughter of the former president, former FAST daughter. She was at the helm of the oil company, the national oil company. Where does she stand now? Prosecutions being thrown left, right, and center. Her brother hasn't survived. Where do you see this going in 2019?
Well, I would say that you're probably likely to see more of these prosecutions going forwards. It's clear that Mr. Lourenco is not scared to tackle interests that, or economic interests that previously had a lot of influence in the economy. Other members of the Dos Santos family are likely to be subject to investigation. But beyond the Dos Santos family, there is also likely to be other people who have a lot of political and economic influence, or who had a lot of influence under the previous regime. They could also be subject to investigation.
Many thanks for making time to speak to us, and thank you for your insight. Now, the fashion business is seen as an industry in Africa that has yet to realize its potential. At Johannesburg's recent Africa Investment Forum, the fashion industry was identified as a key employment driver. Taking us through to the break, FIFI Peters filed this story about the dynamic sector.
It's a multi-billion-dollar industry with huge potential to boost Africa's economies, create jobs, and make investors a lot of money. This was the investment pitch Africa's fashion industry made to prospective investors at the inaugural Africa Investment Forum that took place in Santos, Johannesburg. Those keen to hear why the African Development Bank is investing millions in the creative industries ditched the boardrooms where traditional deal-making is done to chat business over the red carpet and the runway.
Who are you wearing? What was the inspiration of this outfit?
I'm wearing Kisua.
I'm dressed by the beautiful Urban Zulu, it's a South African designer, absolutely amazing. I mean, I feel comfortable in it, so I decided to rock up in it.
My name is Tina Ngogolo. I'm a fashion designer, and I also work as part of my brother's brand called Maxhosa by Laduma. And we are here to represent the brands.
Both established and emerging designers like AMANI, CHAMANE showcased their investment offering in style.
My name is AMANI CHAMANE, and I'm from Durban, South Africa. My line is called Vain by Miss AMANI because obviously vanity, that's what I'm dealing with.
Right, and this is your very first time ever that you showcase any form of clothing on a runway. How are you feeling?
Just the nerves, darling, the nerves. But let me tell you something. I only started designing 2 months ago. I've been doing makeup. I studied makeup in Nigeria at the House of Tara. And when I came back to South Africa, it just emerged into something different. And I just fell upon this fashion and entertainment industry.
All right, so as an emerging fashion designer, 2 months into the game, I mean, how did you learn so quickly? How did you get these designs that you're about to showcase at the Africa Investment Forum done so quickly?
I've truly been so blessed, and I'm actually quite humbled by this major platform. I know that a lot of people don't get the opportunity or the chance to display their work on such a vast platform, even though they've been in the game for a couple of years.
Africa's role as both a consumer and producer of fashion is on the rise. The clothing and footwear market in sub-Saharan Africa alone is expected to be worth $31 billion. Yet, investor buy-in to date has been slow. Medical doctor turned fashion business mogul Dr. Precious Moloi Motsepe, founder and chairperson of Africa Fashion International, explains why this needs to change.
If we look at global trends, the fashion industry is an industry that is worth about $2.4 or so trillion globally, and sub-Saharan Africa has only about $31 billion of that share. I believe that with our human resources, we are a continent of a very young, youthful population. We've got creativity on our continent. We have designers that are truly amazing, and I'm wearing one of our designers tonight.
Who are you dressed?
David Tlale, a local designer. So I believe that if we invest invest in our local talent, particularly around issues of manufacturing and supporting the supply chain from raw material to finished product, so that when we export, we can export finished goods that are value added.
South Africa and Nigeria are currently the top fashion markets on the continent. Countries like Lesotho, Kenya, Mauritius and Swaziland are leaders in terms of textile and clothing exports. The industry is mainly dominated by small to medium enterprises. And like many SMMEs, access to markets, capital and scale can be a challenge.
And we really believe in the potential of the fashion industry, from the cotton farms to the retail stores, to really create value, wealth and jobs right here on the continent. That's why the African Development Bank has decided to very purposely invest in the fashion sector all across the continent. We're also building an online platform to connect fashion entrepreneurs to markets, to finance and to the networks, so that they can together build stronger value chains and have access to new customer bases. Because we really believe that Africa is full of talents, particularly in the creative industries, that is completely untapped, but that can definitely serve both the local, regional and global markets.
Those already in the game, like South African-born designer Laduma, whose Maxhosa brand has reached global prominence, say the opportunities for fashion to compete at a global scale are immense.
At this current time, it's now the whole world is looking at Africa and what Africa really has to offer. And we are in a very exciting time that it's not just about the Curio product, but what really Africa has authentically been producing all this time, and now is really time to really showcase what Africa as a brand in fashion really is.
The reception has been phenomenal. Africans are the ones who have been doing luxury in the past, and we are continue to doing that. It's just that now with internet and social media, we are more out there, and people from internet and the global space have been wanting to see what is unique that is happening in Africa.
The fashion industry globally is expected to double in the next 10 years, generating up to $5 trillion. I mean, this presents tremendous opportunities for the continent to participate at the various levels of the value chain, from design to manufacturing to marketing. But there's an urgent need for Africa to rapidly industrialize and to invest in its local manufacturing capacity if the industry is to meet its job creation potential.
Fifi Peters reporting for CNBC Africa from the Africa Investment Forum in Johannesburg.
Welcome back to Capital Connection. Now joining us to discuss the unrealized potential of Africa's fashion industry is in Kigali image consultant and fashion designer Juan Nsabiye. In Lagos, Nigeria is fashion designer Kola Kuddus. And joining me in Johannesburg studio is Ashliegh Cohen, the academic head of the London International School of Fashion. Ladies and gentlemen, many thanks for making time to speak to us. Ashliegh, let me just start here. Lots of headwinds in the space. We do know the fashion industry is worth trillions of dollars globally, but Africa accounts for just over 31 billion. Just give me a sense of what is actually presenting all these challenges.
So we have a number of challenges. I think the biggest challenge is that we do have the skill, and you can see people moving into the industry in entrepreneurial positions, moving into retailers. We have a huge amount of skill in the industry, particularly in designing, in manufacturing, and in garment construction. The problem is that we need to embrace technology. We need to start looking at insourcing the manufacturing of apparel. We need to stop outsourcing, and there is a there's a lot of resistance between the analogy of outsourcing versus outpricing, and consumers today are wanting more and more fashion. So they're being offered the whole concept of fast fashion, where stock in stores is changing on a regular basis, and the more we offer consumers, the more they want. We also know that the majority of this apparel is not being manufactured in South Africa. It has been outsourced. And unfortunately, at this point in time, we don't have the capacity or the infrastructure to be able to produce at the rate in which consumers are consuming fashion, and at the price that we are able to outsource it for. So really what we would love to look at is to look at the skill set that we have available and to look at investment in technology and investment in infrastructure so that we can bring the manufacturing process home, that we can bring it back to Africa, and that we can stop outsourcing everything because of the price that it then offers product to our consumers.
Right, Ashliegh, just allow me to put a pause on it and take it over to Kigali, Rwanda. Juan, President Paul Kagame very recently making it very clear that he is not a fan of second-hand clothes, and he's pushing locally made products. Of course, this one might argue is a kind of regulation that would foster manufacturing industry and the fashion industry. Just give us a sense of the president's position.
So Rwanda is doing pretty well in the economy in general and in the business, but then specifically in the business of fashion, there is still a long way to go because it's actually a new industry here. And then as Ms. Ashliegh have been talking about it, we have a lot to improve according, for example, of the skills of the designers, because most of the designers, for example, are doing it from out of passion, or they want to, they're passionate about fashion and then they want to do something with fashion. So it's not yet ready to sustain completely even the local market at first, but also to go out the country with in the region, especially that fashion designers around here, we still need to work on adding value on our garments so it can be relevant and competitive on the global market in general. So we still have a lot to do in establishing the system of production, as it had been said earlier, that is going on the competition on the Asia market, for example, on the retailing market, and then that can be relevant to be competitive on the global market in general. So, for example, we have designers, we have upcoming designers that are gaining exposure all around the region, but it's not enough. We still need to work on the variety, on the diversity. Right. We cannot have everything to replace the second-hand market, the second-hand product that is being banned from the country. So we need to replace that with things that actually people can find all the taste, all the according to their needs. So we don't have diversity on the market yet of things made here in Rwanda. So then that's why we need. It's still in the process, but then it's promising because we have talents around here. So we just need to restructure to add the skills, as they have been said, also to add value on the garment, and then the diversity so that it can be competitive on the global market.
Juan, let me just jump in there. Kola, I want to bring you into the conversation here. On one end, we're seeing a country like Rwanda revising regulation to make sure they're not having as much dumping as they can. I want to get your sense on the fashion front. Ashliegh, just before here, she did mention lack of infrastructure or a few headwinds in that particular space. Nigeria, burgeoning population. Just give me a sense of what this means, at least from Lagos.
Okay, so the standpoint of fashion from Nigeria is Nigeria has a population of over 180 million, which is supposed to be an advantage in terms of production. But the challenge here is the Nigeria as a country doesn't even know there's a challenge in terms of fashion. So it's basically the designers that are pushing as a front runner to say there's a challenge and there's a big gap in the industry. And when you talk about challenges, you talk about the foundational challenges, which is like the infrastructure, the educational system of the fashion industry. So I'll give you an example. In Nigeria, you don't have a proper fashion institute. So it's a big challenge. And we have people that can produce, but they are not armed with the proper skill to do that. And you have a lot of small-scale designers with 1 or 2 or 3 tailors they work with. So you can't produce in bulk, meaning you can't compete internationally. So production here is expensive because you don't have the power to do that. You need a generator, you need to buy diesel. So cost of production is expensive here. Right. So because it's expensive, you can't produce much, and the pieces are a bit pricey and they're not competitive.
It's fascinating, Ashliegh, just to get back to you. They have mentioned the cost of production being up. We've seen some load shedding here with ESCOM this month, actually. Fascinating indeed, which is actually synonymous with the parts of Lagos. Going forward, you're seeing a country like Nigeria, huge potential here when it comes to such a massive population, but the fashion space is just almost not present. Again, challenges around manufacturing coming in again.
I think, and one of the other guests have mentioned this, we really are facing that gap between the skills. So we are far more fortunate here in South Africa compared to Nigeria, where we do have fashion institutes. There are a number of people in the higher education space that are training designers from design skill to manufacturing skill to pattern making skills. We're looking at trend, we're looking at textiles, you know, so we certainly do have an advantage here. We are producing incredibly skilled designers into the marketplace. But because we are not internationally competitive in terms of productivity or production, we are still relying on outsourcing of apparel rather than manufacturing it in-house. And what that is doing is, and pretty much like what we're seeing in the rest of Africa, is we have superb designers who are only able to manufacture on a very small scale to a small clientele and to a small audience. Whereas our retailers are focusing on outsourcing production and being able to then service the mass market. And there is a disparate balance that needs to be addressed. I certainly believe that we have the skill and we have the capacity to be able to take on mass production, but we need financial investment. We need investment in infrastructure, and we need investment in technology. You know, the fourth industrial revolution is upon us, and we need to embrace that level of technology, and the technology is there. It's available for our designers to assist with the designing, the pattern making, all the way through to constructing garments and apparel that is going to be that's going to be consumed by our market. But we need that investment.
Without a doubt. Let's take it back to Kigali. Juan, just to bring you back in, China, huge presence across much of Africa. Rwanda is no exception. And how much pressure do you, as a person who is actually a designer and into the fashion space, how much pressure do you feel from Chinese products, which are relatively cheaper?
It's a lot of pressure because, as you have been said, there is no proper structure, no proper settings to the mass production even here. First of all, the cost of production, it's really high when it comes to the chain of production. So even from the purchasing of the fabric to the manufacturing to the final product, maybe it will be even before getting any profits, it will be higher, more than the double of the normal price we get for Chinese products, for a garment or a cloth that is made in China, imported here. So that's very challenging for the local designers because plus everyone tends to compare the products. It's like, why would I buy a garment which is sometimes, the most of the time, less quality than the Chinese clothing, and then buy it higher on a higher price at an expensive cost. So then that in itself kills the market, but also there is no consistency. Someone, a designer might produce a certain collection, but then
Juan, let me just
to
put a pause on you, just right there. It's quite fascinating. I definitely see Ashliegh here is nodding. But just to get a final comment from Kola in Lagos. Kola, it's interesting what's being said about China, but how essential is it for us to actually market ourselves? And we saw the Wakanda movie, Black Panther, and finally there was an African product that many people could relate to. I just want to get parting shots from Ashliegh and yourself. How essential is it for an African product to be marketed as this is Africa?
African fashion being featured in the Black Panther movie is giving a lot of Africans a lot of visibility. And also, I mean, for the designers back here in Nigeria, it's also increased the sales, and it's made a lot of Nigerians or Africans in general to believe more in Africa. So if we can have more features like this, it will also help in shedding more light on the fashion industry. But most importantly, what is expected to grow the fashion industry is having the right policies in place to protect and grow the industry.
Ashliegh, just a parting shot on the marketing. How essential is it, very briefly?
I think it's absolutely essential. I think we have huge talent in our country that can be showcased, both nationally and internationally. And we've got designers who can certainly add value to our country's economy and who can make fashion sustainable, which is really the way that we want to go.
Ashliegh, many thanks for that. And the gentleman in Lagos and Kigali. That's all the time that we did have for this edition of a Capital Connection. Thank you to my guests. And do join us again for Capital Connection every Monday and Wednesday at 6:30 Central African Time. For me and the entire team, have a good night.